and Martin from the National Law Institute. This is our I don't know, whatever, bi-weekly office hours where we answer your Q&A questions. Francis puts the link in the underneath the video so that you can submit your questions. Martin usually gets ahead of them. I think almost always gets ahead of them before us. I tend to add color to Martin's because he's basically usually right. I can't say he's always right because that would just create too many problems. I have to say he's usually right.
That's gonna put an even bigger hat on his already huge head.
Yeah, exactly. So we can't say that, but he's pretty much, yeah. So I add depth and color.
It doesn't work if you explain it.
All right. So we take comments. Francis reads them. Martin explains his position. I usually add color. Sometimes the questions are directed to one of us in particular, and we do that. We have had the luxury of having Maurice around a few times. It's a pleasure when he joins. I think he's probably busy today. But all right, so let's. How many we got today? Because we got a long backlog, right? We got a lot.
Okay. So I'm not even gonna look at the backlog anymore unless you want to do one of these every day to get up to them. So at this point, we're just saying eventually we will get to your questions.
I checked the table, and if I were to add them to the doc, then there'd be about 60.
60. Yeah.
Most of them from Suki.
Okay, so we gotta find out who this person is.
Suki, are you on the call? If you are, write in the chat. Okay, there's like a delay. I'll let you know.
These are good questions. I mean,
but shout out to Lucky Lou 7. He says, "We love you all," or y'all.
Y'all is good. Love you back, brother. All right. This has been a pretty successful movement for us. We've got, I don't know how many 300 and some odd, or
yeah, we're at 300. We're definitely at 300 now.
300, more than 300 questions answered. We had a volunteer that was breaking them up into shorts, which is a real bit of work. Fortunately, that volunteer ran out of time because it is time consuming. We've previously tried to victimize Martin with it, but he has too much else going on. So if you really do feel like doing some video editing, we would appreciate the help. Anyway, let's move on. Question number one.
Question number one for Suki. Roger Lynch has classified 3 forms of leftism: wokeism, communism, and third worldism. Third world leftism. The first 2 are relatively understood by me, but the third one is not. Third world leftism stems from the condition of relative poverty and underdevelopment experienced by nations within Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and some countries in Southeast Eurasia. This form of leftism states that their condition of poverty and general underdevelopment originates principally or entirely from the historical and ongoing exploitative, oppressive, and the malicious actions of Western nations. Absent of this external antagonism, the affected nations would achieve a developmental status comparable to that of their alleged oppressors. Please comprehensively evaluate this form of leftism in the same manner you have evaluated wokeism and other forms of Marxism. I would also appreciate, on top of your evaluation, to evaluate the histories of relevant countries as examples to explain your point, e.g. Venezuela, Cuba, Central America, Western Africa, Southern Africa. Thank you. I think this is from Roger's Anthropology of the Left video.
Mm-hmm. I'm still going. Give me a second.
Curt, your answer is first. Do you want to read it, or should I start?
I have to read your thing. What'd you ask, brother?
Your answer is there first.
No. That's just an accident of my typing. Please go ahead.
I have a longer answer for this one. First, a steelman. Colonialism was obviously not altruistically motivated, though some argued for it in those terms. The institutions and economy in the country were never developed for self-determination, but for maximization of profits, or for obtaining some resource more easily obtained there than in the home country, while keeping the colony dependent. This is not to say altruistic arguments for colonialism are all wrong. The Westerners did, of course, bring their institutions with them, produce order that didn't previously exist there, and improve the lives of the natives on the unfortunate measure economists use, the standard of living. But to the extent any of those places could have worked towards self-determination, I can see how colonization might have stifled it. However, I am not a leftist and recognize how genetic differences factor into this, and in light of them, I don't believe almost any of the affected nations would have attained sovereignty on their own. Contrast with East Asian who saw what was did and quickly copied what they could. Furthermore, also because I'm not a leftist, I don't see other populations as our moral concern. In fact, I think empowering competing populations is an immoral and really dumb thing to do. Second, I'll attempt to define leftism myself via first defining the right wing. The right wing stands for interests of a particular people, usually tied to a particular territory, and their group strategy, which is to say tradition. It emphasizes hierarchical organization, corporatism, meaning parts serving some function for the whole, continuity, stability, and strength. Contrary to modern misunderstanding, it doesn't emphasize markets other than insofar they serve the aforementioned ends. When prioritized, markets very quickly stop serving anyone but merchants. Likewise, liberty isn't prioritized other than in the collective sense, which is to say self-determination, and in the sense of being free to practice traditions and not being required to act contrary to it. This then gives us much older understanding of the political spectrum that people still into it, but are hopelessly confused about today, in which capitalism, particularly of the neoliberal variety, is an expression of leftism because of all the chaos and destruction of traditional institutions and ultimately ethnos that it produces, and various historical forms of socialism were a right-wing effort to restrain or oppose it. The purest expression of leftism is Trotskyism, which explicitly states chaos, that is, permanent revolution, as its goal, and in my reading of history, Stalin was a directionally right-wing revolt against Trotskyism, stabilizing under socialism in one country, which was basically just fascism. Trotsky subsequently adopted liberal democracy and capitalism, seeing as these get them the same goals without the same resistance. Is there any practical difference between creative destruction and permanent revolution? Not in the long run. Practically all leftism we're dealing with today, as far as I can tell, is a Trotsky's effort to borrowing justification from utopian Christians and various British, French, and German philosophers as is convenient. While Marx himself was wrong about much, he was not wrong about merchants and their incentives, and many early Marxists were conservatives at heart. That and the fact that the Marxism label is used to cover consequences of liberalism is why you won't hear me equate Marxism and leftism without these nuances. Sorry for the long and not entirely relevant answer, but given how long some of these answers can get, I thought I might as well explain my position.
That's a beautiful thesis, Martin.
And I think Martin broke a record there in terms of the amount he wrote. He answered to any question.
Martin usually gets further interest.
First question is gonna have a long answer anyway, so.
This one is especially long.
That's. I really like this argument. I really like this argument because it's explanatory power and it is quite broad. Of course, my only difference with Martin would be that the primary beneficiaries of capitalism have been the lower classes.
In the sense that it was a bait at first. But
I think the question, I think Martin would argue that the question is, benefit at what cost? I.e., have we taken full accounting?
Correct. No, I mean, I'm not debating that. I'm just saying that if you, from the reason people follow this stuff is because they want more consumption, right? They want more relief from stress, and they want consumption as a means of releasing it. I think
that is actually also good as a definition of leftism. Anything that sets consumption as an end is leftist.
Interesting. Okay, that's got legs. That's got real legs.
Which is even what Ludwig von Mises says, that production only exists for consumption, but never ask what does consumption exist for.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a point at which I think the way I would look at your argument today, because I just describe it differently, is that the problem with basing everything on consumption is you run out of necessary or useful consumptions, and if you build your organization for consumption, you end up with signal consumption, right? Which is the bad thing, which is that, technically speaking, right now, if you make over a certain amount of money, all you're doing is either saving, which that's good, or buying signal goods. Now, I've got people at the table here, like Francis in particular, who does not buy signal goods. Yet he saves everything.
I give myself permission to buy certain signal goods, like guns.
Yes.
I think there is a place for signal goods, but the way to obtain them isn't by buying them.
I agree with you. That's the same. We're making the same argument.
Yeah.
I think I am more concerned about you're concerned about preservation of autonomy and culture, which is informal capital, right? And I think I might sort of have a more, I'm because I come from a more adaptive culture, I'm probably more concerned about preservation of continuous innovation adaptation as the cultural tradition, and that looks a lot like consumption. I don't mean it to be consumption. I mean it to be innovation.
May I interject for a second? Let's first come to the same definition of consumption, because I think we're talking about a bit different things. I think, from my perspective, right, everything that we produce is consumed in some fashion. Because if it's not consumed and it's being produced, if no one consumes in any way, then that just becomes waste. The only question is whether that consumption goes to, like you said, status signaling, such as a Louis Vuitton bag or whatever, or going into the building of commons in some way. You could even say that the Louis Vuitton bag, in certain reasonable quantities, can help to create a certain level of commons, because at least it's aesthetically pleasing.
Right. So you just made the distinction, though. The distinction between consumption and and this is a problem in the discourse, right? It's so heavily favored toward the world of consumption, it no longer does what the Europeans did previously, was worry about commons. Mm-hmm. And so the difference between is consumption of private consumption, and I mean that of signal goods, right? Because versus public production of private or public production of commons, which is capitalization. So it's consumption versus capitalization. The question is how you capitalize. In my view is that what's happened is we failed to capitalize in the commons, and the commons is what produces the quality of world that no longer requires individual private investment, private expense. So, for example, if we invest in policing and rule of law and this kind of, and for suppression of corruption, you get up a better environment. But if you produce roads, if you produce, I use that example because libertarians hate it. But if you produce roads and transportation and lighting and water and sewer, you are producing things that make the world better. But you can also produce things like you can produce communities, right? You can produce spaces, right? Community spaces. You cannot use post-war, post-war architecture that is about the building and not about the way people actually use the space. So, when I'm saying consumption, I mean private consumption rather than public investment in commons. And the reason I believe in I'm fostering the clarity of this argument is because my view is that if the AI movement continues to be successful, we're going to have to go back to that model because there's no other way to pay for people. There's no other way to pay people. In other words, the idea of providing people with driving people to produce consumer goods was useful during the Industrial Revolution because it dragged people out of insufficient consumption. But now what's happening is what Martin is saying is driving people to excess consumption.
Consumption via debt, oftentimes.
By
borrowing
debt, but
against the future.
not by becoming individuals, right? So much so that they're no longer preserving their culture of commons production, right? That's actually correct. My argument. So again, I think the difference between Martin and I is me not understanding how to frame what he's been saying into something which I've been working on, into a standard model that I could positively assert, categorically and neutrally assert, as usual, the usual human ignorance, error, bias, and folly, instead of intended malice. So or conspiracy to commit malice. So when I look at it, the problem is simply that as we're going into this new world that I anticipate is actually going to happen, that we need to go back to. I mean, look at Europe. They develop 20% of their productivity to produce in their cathedrals, which is basically where they got to meet together and tell stories, educate, and entertain each other. What happened? What are we doing in Greece? Well, I mean, they overdid it. They found silver and built themselves the Parthenon, right? But look in Egypt. Whenever they had so much surplus, they could build the pyramids, right? They were so effective at agrarian production that they could bring people together and build social projects like the pyramids. So those things are monumental things that have reason to exist both economically and socially, socio-politically. But the reality is that our need for commons, if you look around, the world isn't too pretty any longer, and there's no reason it isn't. The world, and what's happening is if all we're doing is we're trying to run away from each other, right, instead of build commons, we're basically leaving people culturally and ethically and morally behind as much as we're leaving people economically and politically behind. So I'd like to restore. I see AI as restoring AI, freeing up unnecessarily status signaling labor in order to reconstitute the commons and eliminate the division and anxiety that's coming from the fact that we're all pursuing individual rather than social goals. Anyway,
maybe the monumental project of our generation or even the next several generations build a space elevator.
Well, I was thinking of like just cleaning up the leftover disasters of the 20th century, and
I have to demolish a lot of buildings.
You do, but if you look at what the Romans and the French did that turns out to be a really fucking good idea. The Paris the Paris that millionaires live in and all the tourists like to go to was basically a slum that Napoleon tore down in order to rebuild in proper form. And I think that's something are going to have to do. We have not only whole cities but whole regions that are um, deprived of infrastructure, but we also have whole regions that are falling into decay and disrepair, and that's partly due to the 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 problem of democracy in cities, which I think is how Martin ought to actually pursue this avenue. I think that's where the actual problem is. The problem of democracy in cities versus the utility of democracy in territorial regions. So if you think it's taken me a while to think about it at Martin's pressure, but I think I understand. I understand what's wrong with the present, the way, and I think I'm focusing on the systemic correction of it, and Martin's been focusing on how the persistence of the ideology and philosophy or instinct of the Industrial Revolution has run its course, and which is to end poverty, which it essentially has, or the property of the past, but it's run its course as a utilitarian function. And this brings up the next point I'd like to make. I'm sorry if I'm rambling on, but the point that this is a deep subject. And the next point is that we have this belief that we can create a stable form of government and economy instead of, as the Romans understood, that the form of government and the form of economic bias is a matter of condition instead of permanency. So you need a republic during going concern because it's the best way to produce markets. You need relative dictatorship in times of war because you need to concentrate the efforts on a single communal goal. And in times of windfall, you need redistributive policies. One of the problems I'm having that the Romans tried to solve, and they actually did, but only because they maintained the ethic among themselves, is how to switch between them. It's pretty hard to switch between those three forms of government because power in government is so advantageous today. So anyway, we have not yet answered his question, and I want to answer his question.
I want to add to, so going back to his original question, he asked to explain this form of leftism. I don't know whether I'm about to say we explain this form of leftism more than just debunk this form of third world leftism. But the way I see it, well, first of all, in terms of whether these countries will be better off without the so-called Western oppressors, all we have to look at is what were these countries, or rather regions, even before they become countries and nations, were like before they encountered Western colonialism versus now. Right? So before that, they were essentially tribal people. Now at least they have some form of industrial structure. And then if you just pick anyone from those countries and ask, would you go back to the way that you were 200 years ago versus now? I doubt anyone will say, we want to go back. And same thing, if you ask the average Chinese, would you like to live in 1825 or 2025? I doubt many of them will want to go back to 1825, even if they remember what it's like. So I think on the net, the Western the Western colonialism actually acted as a forcing mechanism to kick the rest of human race into modernity, whether they like it or not. And now that once the rest of these people have tasted the modernity, they don't want to go back. Now, as to how the third world leftism emerged from that, my simple explanation goes back to status. If you were a king or chieftain in one of those places, your relative status now compared to before has actually decreased, even though your absolute status have increased. And you extrapolate that to the entire culture, the relative status compared to the rest of the world seems to have decreased, because when they're insulated from the world, from modernity, all they see is they're the ruler of their land, because naturally that's how they emerged, right? They have been able to conquer and maintain this territory, and so they're by definition the king of the hill in that locale. But now with modernity, they compare themselves to everybody else, and they see themselves being squalor and so on. And so even though their absolute status have increased, their standard of living has increased many folds compared to 200 years ago, their status, self-perceived status, have not. And that is how this form of leftism emerges.
Yeah, that is a brilliant analysis, yes.
That's also why economists are tone deaf when they tell people that they're living better than kings.
Because it's not about absolute status, it's about relative status. You can live in a house coated in gold, but but if everybody else around you lives in a palace coated in gold, you're gonna feel like you are the poor one.
Yeah. Are my mating prospects better than kings?
Say that again?
Are my mating prospects better than that of a king?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
God, this is a great conversation. The premise of third world leftism, especially in South America, but also in Africa and the Caribbean and certain parts of Eurasia, is that their underdevelopment is the result of ongoing exploitation by Western powers. I'm trying to figure out how that impression it could exist when we've created every institution from the World Bank onward to try to drag people out of poverty into development.
It's actually very simple. Now, how does that phrase go? It goes along the lines of there's nothing. Oh, gosh, okay, I need to think about this for a second. It essentially goes like that. The people who owe you debt, instead of expressing gratitude, they actually see you. Like if you extend a helping hand to someone, and if you do it, too much, then instead of seeing you as their savior, they're actually going to see you as the object of envy.
Yes, exactly. There's an African proverb I use all the time, which is, "Let no man is a hero to his debtors," which is the reduction of that. Which funny that it should come out of Africa, but they have the oldest economy. So the problem is that there are parts where you can say this was right, but it's very hard to say that this is right. Because, for example, the problem with South America isn't Europeanism. It's actually Spanish. In other words, Spain was of underdeveloped country, feudal country, and it brought it underdeveloped feudalism to South America. And South America was captured by that, not all of it, because something still fucked it up, was captured by that feudalism. So there's the elites in South America were pretty parasitic, and to some degree they still are. Whereas Martin's gonna say, well, all capitalists are parasitic. Okay, something like that. I'm teasing you, Martin. But when we get to other parts of the world, the French, for example, you want to be a British or a Dutch colony. Why? Because they were the most institutionally advanced people. That's who you want to be a colony of, right? If you're a colony of France, you're going to be a less developed people, and you're going to have the problems of Vietnam, etc. If you're a Spanish colony, you're going to have the problems of Spain, which is the least developed. It's one of the least developed American colonies at the time of a world expansion, and the colonial era. So it depends on who gave it to you. If you're an English colony, you are so far ahead of the rest of the pack in your area. It's unbelievable. I mean, look at what we just did with Hong Kong. I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna say Hong Kong. It's objectively is better. Hong Kong compared to Macau, right? Macau
right.
was a Portuguese colony.
Or look at Singapore did intentionally, right? He did it by design. He says it's Anglo institutions with Asian characteristics.
The Chinese are gonna hate me for saying this. I think China would be far better off if the British actually took over the whole country, like India.
Yeah, I mean, look at India. India is a great example. China has leaps and bounds of advantage over India.
Probably standard deviation IQ if you take the average.
Yeah, I mean, is it at least? It's more than
maybe two.
1 point. It's almost 1.5. So you have a profoundly distinct advantage, whereas every policy they try to brute force in that country produces a temporary good at a medium-term hazard. So I look at it as great. You want to be an English colony. If you're a French colony, maybe not so much. If you're a Spanish colony, maybe in the end, depending on who's colonized, you're even better off than you were the French.
I think, yeah, I was going to say between the French and Spanish colonies, kind of a toss-up. It's hard to argue whether Vietnam is better off than Mexico and vice versa.
Yeah. So if you get a Dutch colony, you can't tell the difference between a Dutch colony and an English colony. So the way I look at it, because what's the difference?
Which were all the Dutch colonies? Borneo?
Fuck, I can't remember. Don't ask me.
There wasn't a whole lot of them.
No. Well, that's because they were mostly recaptured. So when you look at this, I'm like, well, the problem, the correct way to look at the problem is, first, both you and Martin are correct in your assessments. The way to look at the problem is that what was your degree of development when you were colonized, and secondly, what was the degree of the people who colonized you? If you were English, they invented the modern world. So okay, you got an advantage. If they were French or Spanish, you got either the authoritarian French problem, or you got the feudal Spanish problems, right? You got one of those. Given that those are the major colonizers, if you got colonized by Russia, good fucking luck. It's not been a very good thing for you. Although, if you look at places like the stands, Kazakhstan, it was a benefit to the Kazakhs to have the.
Well, I think it really comes down to your civilization's relative cultural and state development stage versus the colonizer.
That's right.
What is the distance, right? Assuming that from primitive to advanced, assuming that you're here and your colonizer is here, and the colonizers are able to bring you halfway there, that's still better than they have not. Right. But then they got me thinking, has there been any examples where the colonized was at a higher stage of state development and the colonizer was a lesser?
Well, in the contact of Islam is actually the major example, right?
Good point.
Islam is the colonizer, the negative colonizer, the colonizer of destruction.
Mr. Weinhagen, you grace us with your presence.
Though that's the first.
Yes, it is first. Well, at least a first in 2 years or something.
So the point I got one more point. So I made the point about relative positioning. You guys made the point about status perception as the global market increased, their awareness increased, and so they see whatever. Um, I think the point I'm still trying to make is that just as the previous colonial powers tried to increase their European, the colonizers tried to increase their power and economies relative to one another. Because remember, colonialization happened during the agrarian age, right? So the only way to get more powerful is more land, right? That's really or more and better land, right? And
I mean, it's also about the natural resources that exist on that land.
yes, but okay, sorry, the agrarian age. So it's both the natural resource and the productivity of the land and the population on the land that can extract both. So they're competing, but they're living in an era where expansion is the norm, right? Throughout history, because of that reason, the economy of any power or any state or any polity is dependent upon the quality and volume of territory and the number of people in it, right? I mean, the steppe is a fucking nightmare, right? I mean, so you only get that out of it. The desert's a fucking nightmare, so you only get out that of it. Then you have the gradual river valleys versus the forests. So you have all this uh, um, this variation, but it's predicated on land. The problem Americans have had since because Americans recognized that the industrial age had brought an end to that problem. Then they were worried about creating trade instead, not and borders instead, in order to make the trade possible. So the problem for Americans is they try to accelerate the development under their ideology instead of accelerating a development through some sort of a rule of law until the public actually got there, which is what happened in India. So my view is that, of course, we try to bring democracy to the Arab world, and that is ridiculous until you actually turn the Arab world back into tribal community, and Africa for that matter, into tribal borders. So you can't do the democracy without first fixing the borders. And so that was the Anglo-American folly of the 20th. So in that respect, some problems of the primitive world, not so much Southeast Asia anymore, but certainly Africa and the Middle East, those problems are a reflection of the attempt of the Anglosphere, the Americans in particular, to create a peaceful world of trade and modernity without providing people the incremental means of achieving it. Um, I think it's happening anyway. And I'm trying to think why it's happening is mostly the internet, which is just hysterical to me. But who's the guy in Burkina Faso? What's this guy's name? That is he Burkina Faso. I can't remember his name right now. You listen to that guy talk. He's a hot shit for an African leader. He's a really good African leader. So we're seeing, it's just a difference in of where were you in your development cycle, and where was the state that colonized you in their own, and these things don't get done in a generation; they take 6 or more. Anyway, so the answer is I think the question is Rudyard correct? I think he's correct in that there is a third world form of leftism. I'm not sure what he actually can't remember now what he said about it, so I can't really comment on.
Yeah, I didn't see the video.
I can't remember. I watched it, but I don't remember it. His work over the past, since he sort of recovered, his work over the past few months has really become stellar. So Wow, we really killed that one. Do you have anything else, Martin, you want to add to that? Francis, anything else?
Nope.
Nope. All right, I think we killed that one.
Yep. We're following our usual pattern just fine. First question takes the longest. All
Well,
right.
well, I wonder if it has something to do with when we stop, wherever we cut off the previous session, is because we've hit a question that's too difficult to answer in the time.
There's also that. All right, question 2 from Suki. How do you 3 foresee digital devices changing human cognition long term, especially if we do not develop methods of dealing with it as a society? Is it warranted to worry about the negative long-term collective cognitive effects this will have on our society? If so, what should be done, and will the NLI address this in its work? I think this is important for the NLI to look into because I see it as an external risk factor to keep our civilization at our current level of development. If most people, particularly children and infants, are exposed to these devices without rules, adaptive cognitive habits or modifications to digital devices deal with their downsides, this could likely result in a net negative effect on the collective cognition of the developed world and humanity at large. Lower working memory, lower capacity for self-monitoring, self-regulation and error detection, and lower attention span. Depth and control, lower capacity for response inhibition, maladaptive reward systems, and excessive cognitive offload, to name a few. And hence, compromise of cognitive traits and attributes required to build and maintain our civilization in the first place, which will have negative consequences.
I'm in agreement with Suki here. Certain technologies should be restricted for military needs, which is to say production of sovereignty, and otherwise banned as deleterious to a healthy social ecology. If we decide to release them, we have to try at a small scale first and see the effects, not immediately allow the whole society to be flooded. Chesterton's fence must be in effect.
Is that all you said?
Mm-hmm. That's all he wrote.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got way too much on this subject because I thought about it a lot. Yes, absolutely, it's a problem. Yes, it will lead to decline in executive function. Executive function is neural, but it's like a muscle, and that it needs to be worked in order to be strong. It's like many personality traits. They need to be stressed in order to be overcome. So this is the equivalent of taking fitness out of education, right? It's pretty serious. Is it going to be that way for everybody? No. There are those of us who have executive function, but in the first place, although those of us with a touch of ADD know what the conflict is, but we can have executive function on our own, but and so we will continue to exercise it because it is a way that we feel good, right? But most of the world would prefer to be like dog. We should have Brandon here, dogs or horses or whatever. I mean, the whole argument is that dogs would rather be dogs. The horses would rather be horses, even better. The horses would rather be horses on their own than do anything with us. So the same thing is with people, is you can have a decline in executive function. I'm worried that decline will equal a reversal of the demonstrated intelligence that's come about through generalization. In other words, the knowledge of the sciences.
For the benefit of the audience, can you define executive function?
The part of your brain that's up here, the last part, because your brain sort of
neocortex.
Right, it's right in the neocortex, first part, and it goes down behind your nose and eyes here, because your brain sort of works like that.
Well, that's the region where it comes from. But
right,
what does it allow you to do?
Think of it as if you get the Christmas lights on, it keeps current going back to those existing Christmas lights. So it gives you agency over what you're thinking about. So you have the ability to persist an idea, work out a problem, reason through things, all because of your frontal cortex. It's actually kind of, if you have damage to your frontal cortex, it's actually quite, it literally makes you angry because you're frustrated all the time. And when you see people have poor impulse control, it's underdevelopment in the frontal cortex. So
That explains the Africans a lot.
So the problem with the Africans is lower neoteny, right? The question then is it just the prefrontal cortex, or is it a more systemic? And given the number of things, in other words, the number of incremental variables that seem to be affected by domestication syndrome, which is neoteny, seems to be fairly high. And that would mean that whatever that combination of factors that's producing, we can think of adulthood. In other words, agency.
Sorry, I meant that as a half joke. You don't have to go
Oh, I
there.
thought you were really asking me the question.
Oh,
I don't see it as a problem with Africans as long as they're not here.
It's not a problem for them. It's a problem for them for us when we're next to them. I think some of the things are funny, like if you scare a white person, right, a European, or actually everybody other than an African, they will tend to recoil. But an African will, especially an African male, will attack in response to being scared, and which I find fascinating because it's the only group. And so you see a whole bunch of these differences, which I find are fascinating. But anyway, they're just.
Is it because in the environment that they evolved from, in terms of fight or flight response, flight will almost always get you killed because everything else is either more poisonous or faster than you.
I mean, you'd like to reduce it to that, but it's more general. All you're doing is look at how puppies act instead of wolves, right? I mean, you have a puppy, a dog, a wolf, right? I mean, this is pretty simple spectrum. And what you find is the wolves are bigger, they have bigger brains, and they're more urgently persistent. But if you go to a dog, they're less urgently persistent, right? They're more like us. They've got the ability to use some agency. Unless they're doing interdog signaling, which tends to be very fast, they're more like us. Like if you watch an alpha dog calm a disruptive dog, he's fucking calm. He's very calm. He just walks up and puts him down and holds his paw on him and says, basically, calm down. If you look at puppies or children, puppies more so than children. Puppies are very gregarious, right? They're very gregarious. They're not aggressive at all. They're playful, and they're often frightened. And so that's the neotenic spectrum, right? I mean, you get we get a bigger brain right, but the demand on the energy consumption of the brain decreases with agency, which is kind of fascinating. So you don't need as big a body or brain to feed it. Whereas if you have a big body and brain at our level of development, you get more agency rather than more impulsivity and durability. So what you notice in Africans, what I notice is they have durability and impulsivity, which is simply, and we see that we see the Afro-Asiatics, which is most of the Middle East, not all of it, most of it. The Afro-Asiatics have a little more agency, but they have the same impulsivity, but the impulsivity is affected more at the interpersonal social scale, sort of like a young adult. Asians are interesting, and Europeans are interesting because we act more like a mature adult in our impulsivity and agency. Now, as we know, the differences in group versus out group, right? I mean, That's one thing. And there's a lot of range within a group. That's true too. But the median does move, right? And the influential median, which tends to be the higher IQ people with the combination of higher IQ and higher conscientiousness, that tends to matter more. So
I've seen differences in how babies behave, which is pretty fascinating.
yes.
Like black kids, if you like hold them, they're already walking.
Yep.
None of the others do. And then I've seen experiments with cloth.
Yeah.
If you put cloth over a face of a white baby, it will try to fight you and remove it.
Yep.
An Asian baby will just leave it there.
Yes.
In some cases.
It's the same thing with the crib test, which I don't know if that's the one you're referring to. Or I know about the cloth test. I think that's separate for the crib test. But Asian babies will most likely be calm. A white baby might be agitated. A black baby will be very agitated, right? Yeah, these differences are apparent at all times, but it's just neotonic development, and neotonic development is just migration of stem cells from the neural tube. They cause maturity. So it's just complicated.
Use Asians as being bred for docility.
Well, you say you bred for docility, but maybe, maybe that was just a small pop, because we don't. I've had this discussion repeatedly, and I can't tell what's true. There's two routes into Asia, right? There's the southern route along the coast, East Asia, and there's the northern route. You follow the Indus River, you go through Mongolia, north into the top, but also straight across into the core of China. Everything I've seen is that the dominant force appears to be the one through Mongolia, right? Right. But at the time that we were seeing the migration through the southern route, those people were still closer to the sun than they were to today's Africans, right? Or later Africans, right? And so you have the possibility of having Proto-Asiatic features for two reasons. You have a neotenic relation to the cold, which is a fucking brutal place up there. Or you have it from the sun. And so I've seen those two, and I don't have enough information to decide on what it is. The northern route is more explanatory to me, but it might be that the earlier people were more docile in the first place.
I'm thinking probably more recent, since East Asian cultures started with state.
Yep.
And when you're working in a state, especially ruling elite, will just reward. You tend to reward the docile rice farmer more than the aggressive warriors.
Correct. So that's the basic argument.
Yeah, and it doesn't take many generations to have certain traits to stick.
No, doesn't take.
You can almost call it an adaptation to an increased surface area for socialization.
Correct. No, really, that's the mathematical expression of it essentially. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
What happened to you? I mean, how did you become so antisocial?
Spend time with you.
Love you.
Yeah,
All right.
well, the domestication syndrome, right? So it's an adaptive, a fitness adaptation.
Yeah.
Right. And we see it increase when we see the amount of people that you're in contact with increases, right? When the group gets bigger, you see that fitness change, that adaptation had to evolve, right? But there's also a point where it breaks free from environmental pressures, right? Nature's feedback. And that's when that domestication syndrome starts to become pathological. And we start to see the pathologies that were described in the question here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Absence of pressure is a pressure too.
What's that?
Absence of pressure is a pressure too.
Well, I mean, the primary pressure towards the economy appears to be the climate. The climate forces people to live in close proximity, right? Especially during winters. So it appears that the colder it gets, the more force non-aggression, right? I mean, limited aggression behavior.
Yeah, non-aggression, and the more you force, preserving resources over time.
That's correct.
So
I think we deviated off of this question a little bit.
we're not though. The technology changing human behavior. It's true of all technology, not just recent technology.
Starting with a wheel and horses.
Civilization itself is a technology.
Yes.
And as civilization pushes nature further and further out, we see dysfunctions emerge. That's going to be true of any technology we get dependent on. We can fix that by not getting dependent on the technologies. By building a foundation of being able to sustain ourselves as a human organism, and then on top of that foundation, leverage and integrate technological advancement. Then it doesn't become pathological. It doesn't produce these negative outcomes.
Is there another alternative happening at the same time, which is for some of us, we became so adapted to technology that we're able to exceed our human limitations of this form?
No, I think some of us are introducing our own proxies for those pressures. So we're compensating for that distance.
Yes.
Right? We're compensating for the absence of nature applying the pressure by applying the pressure on ourselves. Right? We're biased towards exposing ourselves.
Yeah, isn't that just a natural aggression, natural response to lacking? Right, we're lacking decidability, right, by natural pressures. So we're finding other decidability by other pressures.
We're also, there are some, people are more or less sensitive to the sensation of that dysfunction.
Yeah.
Right. So like some of us were really sensitive to that dysfunction sensation. So we try to solve it by seeking out competencies that resolve that dysfunction.
Okay, so whereas nature provides consistent, at least within a region, consistent boundary for people. In the absence of it, they specialize in that boundary condition and resort to conflict. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Like the list of dysfunctions that Suki, I think it was, listed here. It's almost exactly the list that I categorize under what I call pathological neoteny. Right, we're pushing childhood ever further into adulthood. We're not applying the pressures to transition us from the human animal as a child to the human animal as an adult.
No, that's the natural female intuition, though, right? I mean, and in addition, that helps the females maintain control, and in a sense, that control is what gives them mindfulness. So it's the female instinct is infantilized, not only because it's her own fear, but because it's her reason to exist. But Francis, you brought up that we've not answered the question. I thought I'll post this later, but it's not like I haven't thought about what the remedy for this is. There's a remedy for it, right? It's actually possible, but it's like once we stopped farming, we had to have fitness programs.
Right. Yeah, we need practice those pressures.
We need to restore the pressures artificially in order to create the healthy human. So we're going to have attention discipline in order to maintain the healthy mind. Yeah. The real problem, of course, is the internet's created an economy of dopamine exhaustion, right?
And you go on detox programs.
You guys were remarking earlier that people want to be dogs, right? That's only because we've turned the entire world into a dog park.
Yes. Yeah. So you brought up one aspect of it, Luke, which is in the one you're always forwarding, which is the isolation from reality. It creates an absence of fitness in the individual, right? Which is really what Taleb's argument is, right? It's like anti-fragility. The reason you subject organisms to stress is to create anti-fragility. But I think that's only half the problem. The other half of the problem is without common stressors, you lose common interest. Right. And so and that leads to devolution and decline. So I think those two issues are equally impressive.
Yeah, it's not just the entry fragility. You lose the pro-social adaptations as well when you don't have
Right.
adequate pressures, right? You mentioned the gym. We recognize in physical fitness when we neglect those pressures, we deteriorate, right? We've known that for a couple generations now.
Yep.
We're not recognizing that same dynamic exists for cognitive fitness, for psychological fitness, for emotional fitness, for
Right.
perceptual fitness, right? Our nervous system fitness, limbic system fitness. We're not recognizing that same dynamic is in play for all of our biological functions as humans and how we interface with the world. So we don't have those pressures coming in. We've not yet introduced adequate proxies to sustain the positive adaptations. And so we're seeing dysfunctions emerge across all those other domains.
Yep.
So
Yeah, my answer is basically to not allow depriving people of those pressures.
Well, that's like saying the primary addition we need to restore to the law is the legislature may not legislate the opportunity for irresponsibility. That's basically the problem of women in voting, is that they willingly legislate the reduction of responsibility, which is exactly what produces an adult with agency necessary for self-government, rather than a fucking dog that needs to be, rather than a dog that needs to be managed by an owner, or in our case, a despot. So
state is one side of this, of course. The question is, to what extent do we want to allow market to remove those pressures?
I agree with you. I don't disagree with you. This ends up justifying Luke's first principle is actually correct, which is that Luke's version of we have three versions. We have Caleb's version of anti-fragility. We have Luke's version of isolation from natural pressures, and we have my version, which is isolation from political responsibility. But those are all the same thing, right? They're isolation from pressures that are necessary to maintain not only agency, not only the healthy person, but to maintain social and political cohesion.
Well, some of those, like government, for example, government is a proxy for pressures that nature would have put on us in our natural environments, right? Now we've gotten to the point where not only are we pushing nature's pressures away, we're pushing some of the proxies we've introduced, over time, that have just evolved and emerged out of our living together. We've developed proxies. That's what all traditions are, is just proxies for natural pressures.
Yeah.
The norms and stuff, they're all just proxies, right? And now we're pushing those proxies away as well. And so we're magnifying and amplifying the speed, the acceleration at which dysfunctions emerge, because we're getting so far distant from not only the pressures, but the proxies for the pressures too. So yeah, we're going to keep seeing dysfunctions until we stop trying to escape them. You don't get to escape nature's feedback.
Right.
We think we can transcend by getting ourselves distant from nature. You don't. You go inert. Anything without pressure just stops evolving. It goes inert, right? Then entropy kicks in. So.
All right. So I just want to argue that I've got a draft of this, of the Institute's recommended recipe for approaching this problem. I don't think I'm 100% right. It would do with everybody's input here.
Right. No, this is what my book was about too, solving this problem. So.
I know. That's why I'm glad you're here and playing it up. But we have to. But now that's a general prescription, and this prescription for the age of social media and AI. The benefit of it is we can find people like ourselves, right? We've built an organization of hyper-moral people dedicated to finding an answer to modernity, right? Were you playing with one of your children there? Is that what I saw as a child?
Had to get an untied shoe. There was a knot in the shoe.
That's what I thought. Shit, I lost my train of thought.
You're outlining your solution. You're writing up the solution.
Right. So the solution. So the solution is the same. I want to restore it in politics, right? Well, we have to now restore it in the social economy, and you were trying to restore it as I guess your objective is basic education, right? I mean, is that what you're trying to?
Yeah, people should have this foundation in place by the time they're 12.
Yes.
Right, the latest. Right. If you look throughout all of tribal history that we have access to, or any kind of records from, you entered adulthood at about that age. That means you had this foundation in place and could survive as a human adult by about that age.
Right.
So that's where we're ready for this foundation to be in place.
Right. So what I don't like about the female-led education system is that there's this that they're reducing stressors to the point, and then we throw people into the capitalist economy, which is a fucking meat grinder, and they're totally unprepared for it. Even if they go to college thinking they're going to be prepared for it, and they're not prepared for it. They go to college and spend a lot of money on nonsense courses, especially women, and they go and they think they're going to be prepared for it. But who do you think is going to be the first outcast from unemployment? Is women by AI.
Yeah. But, well, I think in a large way, they stand to benefit the most from this correction. In the frame I use, this process started, 12, 15,000 years ago. We started really pushing nature away. But we started with women and children first, right? And we started to try to keep them safe, which meant remove them from exposure to adaptive pressures. That's what keep them safe turns into. Yep. Right? And so they've got a 10,000 year head start on the men in accumulating these dysfunctions, right? So we haven't seen what a healthy human female looks like in a millennium.
Yep.
So we don't even know what that means at this point.
You can probably still find them in the depths of Amazon or the Papua New Guinea highlands.
That are enormously abundant. There's so little pressure that those civilizations never change. You can recognize a complete lack of adaptive pressures in those civilizations. They're the worst ones to measure innate humanity from, because they represent
and if that's what healthy females look like, count me out.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's always been my big pushback on. We found this lost tribe, and that must be what humans looked like back then. Nope, they represent what happens when humans stop changing, when humans stop adapting. They represent what it actually looks like if we separate ourselves from nature's feedback.
So we've kind of got some heavy stuff here. I'm trying to figure out, have we answered his question?
You say you're going to write up something.
There is a risk. There is a risk, but the risk can be mitigated.
Okay, so we've covered the effect, correct? All right. Can NLI? Yes, we can. I have a draft. I think it's early. I think we should start working on it explicitly, and I can start sharing that. You think it's important? I think it's important for. You think it's important for NLI? I think it's important for NLI because, as you can see, Martin, Luke, and I in particular are looking at this. It's like I always bring up the cover of Gödel Escher Bach, which is like you can look at the shape from three directions, right? But any one direction lets you see one thing. But if you look at from a three-dimensional view, you see what's real. The shape really is. I think that it is part of our mission, because our mission is to solve, in effect, is to solve the problem of modernity has a specific meaning, but of our current crisis, yes, which is just a crisis of change.
I'd consider society basically anti-fragile if it could lose access to internet and electricity and still be basically all right.
Yes, that is the foundation you need. Yeah.
So Curt, I suggest you to write this.
Apex adaptive generalists, and we've made a habit of stopping to generalize. It's a terrible mistake for how we evolved.
So Curt, I suggest you to write your thing up into publish into the doc or something, and then have Martin and Luke add to it, and we can take it from there and turn it into an article on X.
Yeah, But it absolutely is something analyzed and looking into. I mean, I started in Curt's frame, looking at how do we solve this at the government level, at the level of law. And then as I was exploring the solution, I saw the gap at the bottom. That's where I jumped in. Was at the gap at the bottom. That, we got to do both.
Well, yeah, even government answer requires changing stuff at the bottom.
Right.
Okay. It's been 83 minutes. We've only got through 2 questions. We should move on to the third one. You good with that?
I'm always happy to jump in and slow things down even more. So
It's a luxury to have you with these, Luke. So thank you for coming.
All right. Question 3. Curt, how does the right's tendency to revive Hitler-era ideology or fall into racial tribalism violates the core principles of natural law, like reciprocity, operationality, and decidability? Isn't this behavior, especially the idea that whites are entitled to outcome just from being white, essentially the same anti-reciprocal mindset we criticize in the left? Since natural law is designed to build just, scalable institutions, how could a movement based on collective blame, mythic identity, or tribal purity ever produce a legal or moral order others will cooperate with or even respect? And wouldn't this kind of tribalist nostalgia be one of the biggest internal threats to the right's legitimacy and capacity to replace the current regime?
I'm pretty sure I know who this is, and it's about me among others. I've stated my far more nuanced position on the Nazis before. This is not the issue here. The individual in question is just demanding more globalism, thinks the correct interpretation of natural law is the one that justifies that, and Curt GPT is reinforcing his biases. So again, I see natural law as laws of human behavior and particularly of human organization. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. But I cannot imagine a better prescriptive use if we are ever in a position to provide it than for the benefit of one's people, to decrease their external dependencies, make them stronger, more anti-fragile, less vulnerable to foreign subversion and takeover, in general improve their long-term strategic position in the world relative to all others. If anything, this is the most natural use. If you have something else in mind for any given group, you're clearly not pursuing its self-determination, but seek to submit it to some other goal, and they would rightfully kick you out over that. So yes, my goal isn't eliminating tribalism, it's scaling it.
Yeah, well, what do you think 1,000 nations bloom means? That's the whole point, is 1,000 nations bloom, so that we develop the informal and formal institutions within the polity that best suit our properties, right? Our interests. Not only our interests abstractly, but our properties. Like you can't have the same polity in a high trust as you can in a low trust society, right? Or the other way around. You can't have a high trust polity in a low trust society. It takes a long time to build a high trust society. It takes generations. So, as reverse to Curt GPT, if I ask this question of Curt GPT, it will give me the wrong answer. And the reason is that we've only taught it interpersonal ethics. We haven't taught it intergroup ethics. And so, of course, it's going to give you the standard conclusion, because it's going to just ask you if you're reciprocal between people. It's not going to answer the question if you're reciprocal across peoples. So, I mean, we just haven't taught it that yet. Of course, it's going to say silly shit, because that's what it's been programmed to do in the case of the absence of any other pathway through its world. So, yeah, I can see how that would come up. On the other hand, Martin's completely correct. I mean, the point of natural law is to say, if you want to cooperate, here's how you cooperate. It's not how you must behave, right? That's all it says. Now, if you have a different environment and different demographic composition and different levels of development, all you can the thing the natural law tells you is it tells you how to cooperate despite those differences. Well, we know this empirically because international law basically, by verisimilitude, up and down, basically approaches natural law. And that's because natural law is just what people need in order to cooperate, despite their differences. So,
Well, I would say it approaches reciprocity when both nations are relatively equally capable of punishing the other. But
yes,
if there's a big inequality, then might makes right.
right, correct. So, so when might makes right, it's not cooperation, right? So, so you mean that's more of interaction, right? So, but yeah, so I don't. I mean, from the first part of the question is how does the right tendency to survive Hitler ideology? Well, because I mean, Martin's better at this than I am, way better. But my understanding of the Nazi ideology is to defend Germany against the twin threats of what Martin would call Anglo-liberalism, or what I would call island ethics, versus the Soviet socialism, which what I would call as Eurasian threats, versus communism, which is an underclass threat. So Nazis were trying to basically find some way of continuing Germanic civilization's core values.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hope Kurt's internet is not down.
I just want to add a nuance while we wait for him to reappear. Right? Oh, is he connecting?
Maybe. You might as well go ahead, Luke. No, wait. Okay, Kurt is back. Kurt, we lost you for at least 10 or 15 seconds.
Yeah, your internet goes down when you speak positively about Germans.
Okay, so Germans were threatened by Anglo-island liberalism, by French socialist liberalism, which is really Catholicism, right? By Soviet Eurasianism, which is really just Judaism with the military, I guess, and communism, which is in fact Judaism, which is a lower class threat. And so Germany was trying to, having lost the world wars, Germany was trying to find a way to recover from them. And the truth is, they were right in the First World War. So they put together a program of ideology which was hyper-nationalist. They sought to restore their because Germans had done a big, I'm going to offend Martin this way, I don't know, and have done a lot of work settling Eastern Europe. And so Germans were spread out into parts of Eastern Europe. And as such, they viewed it as protecting their people and restoring their territories of influence. So they saw the problem with France, right? France had taken over some of German lands, and so they thought that they had been abused by that war, and that they were trying to preserve themselves against three modernizing hostile forces when they were a conservative traditional civilization that was more right than everybody else in politics, and that had at the time had developed a superior scientific, technological, and industrial base, despite their lack of resources that the previous colonists had access to. So I don't look at this like a religious debate, which is how it's intentionally framed by the oppositions of the traditional descriptions of the war. I look at it as an evolutionary necessity of a population trying to preserve its group strategy and advantages, and so, especially after they were unjustly conquered in the First World War. So, so when I look at the Nazi thing, I don't see all the rhetoric around it as meaningful. I see it as simply what you do to create an ideology of nationalism for the preservation of your culture. Well, you know, Western culture is largely Germanic, except where it's Latin, which is only less Germanic. And so when I say, okay, so when you have this Germanic culture, and it's the source of most of our traditions and laws and institutions and morals and ethics, everything into intuitions. Well, you know, that heart of Europe was an important part of our shared history. So it's normal for people today to seek an index, right? An index, a representation of what it is they seek to preserve. And so they're using this one. Is the whole Nazi thing really useful? Well, I don't particularly think it's useful today, but if we understand what the tactics they took to bring about that nationalism, most of them are exceptionally good. Really. I mean, if they had just stopped when they got if Hitler had stopped when he had restored initial German land, he'd be a fucking hero.
He was trying to do what he thought needed to be done to make Germany a great power, which is what sovereignty in the modern world takes.
Yep.
I'm looking at this question again, and I think it's conflating several things, right? So the second sentence, isn't this behavior a special idea that whites are entitled to white outcome just for being white? I don't recall really seeing that anywhere on the right. Not the return to land movement, not even the Hitler. Like Hitler didn't even say, you know, whites are entitled to our fruits just for being white. It's more like the whites established civilization, and that they're rightfully for doing so. I don't think that quite said what I was trying to say here.
No, I get what you're saying. Just use an example. I have if your pursuit of nationalism, right, of your people's interest, is restorative of an injustice, like the First World War, I understand it. But if you're trying to expand into other ethnicities, then no. I mean, it's because now you're depriving them of something. So I don't think this is a very hard question. Nationalism, or an attempt at maximum autarky, right, which is what they were trying to do, is a means of insulating yourself from hostile forces. Today's effort by Trump to repatriate industry and his emphasis of America first is nationalism. It's an attempt to insulate yourself from hostile forces. All right, that's just the logical thing to do for everyone. I actually can't understand most people's objection to things. If France wants to become more French, nobody objects to them, right? Yet they're the ones that want the conquest of Europe.
And then later says, how could a movement based on the collective blame, mythic identity, or tribal purity ever produce a legal or moral order others could cooperate with or even respect? Well, I don't know about collective blame, but mythic identity and tribal purity, just look at the Japanese. I mean, they produce a polity that others could definitely cooperate with and respect in modernity, right?
It's not mythic. It's also not mythic.
It is. Okay, Amaterasu, that is mythic. They do have a certain mythic identity.
Right, but the mythic, okay, so there's a difference between a mythic identity that is a unifying story that helps maintain the group strategy. That's different from the fact that their ethnicity and their commonality is mythical. It's not. I mean, You're right. I mean, it's like we
Yeah, it's
know
like
we're
it's like we're descendants of this first emperor or something versus we're descendants from gods,
yeah. I mean,
or rather, we
Yeah.
are gods.
We are
There's
hyperboreans.
a difference between entitled to outcomes and you're entitled to my investment just for being in my in group. Anyone in my in group is entitled to my investment just for being in my in group,
yeah.
because that's how we define in group, is by that common property. So
Right.
as I invest in that property, I'm investing in my in group. Right now, so many people conflate that. They think anyone with access to a common property possesses that common property.
Yeah.
They don't have the definition of invest in and defend.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
whole feminine communism thing, right? Is that you can't have property, you can't have demonstrated interests, because that means you're walling me off from expropriating them without contribution. They're
Yeah.
parasites, right? Which is what this person's advocating.
Right. Yeah.
In white countries, obviously white people would be treated differently from anyone else who comes in.
Right. Yeah. And then, the other, I don't know, bad faith presentation of this is, Hitler era ideology. In-group preference is not a Hitler era ideology. You happen to possess an in-group preference, but it's not.
It's been the historical norm,
Right.
except the
Yeah.
last 50 years or so. That's been
It's why
just
humans
beaten
survive in
out.
anything but the most hospitable environments. It's because of in-group preference. So,
All you have to go all you have to do is go to somewhere in Middle Asia, like where that rogue philosopher is running his tour groups, and see how the local Kyrgyzstans treat everybody else who doesn't look like them.
Another way to frame this is that tribalism and hero worship and all that was so effective that everyone else had to unite to destroy Germany. It's hardly an argument against it.
I think it's a stupid question, or it's just dishonest.
I wrote a couple of months ago. I wrote a post that I think answers this, and I'd like to read it off if you guys don't mind.
Please, please.
It's a simple way of describing this dynamic, I think. So I want you to have a group. I want to have a group as well. I want your group to be different from mine. I want my group to be different from yours. I want to visit your group and experience those differences from your group's perspective. I want you to visit my group and experience those differences from my group's perspective. I want our groups to find ways to cooperate where our interests align. I want our groups to leave each other alone where our interests diverge. I want our groups to seek resolution where our interests come into conflict. I want my group to pursue its interests in any conflict that cannot be resolved, even at the cost of your group's interests. And I fully expect your group to do the same. The people that don't want groups to exist, such as the person asking this question, yours or mine, think both of us immoral for wanting our groups to exist. But I don't care over much because they're not part of my group. So that's how I address that question.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want every other group to visit.
That's just you.
Is it?
If my group is where I want them to be, other groups visiting has no threat to them at all.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's a good place to end on this question. All right, question 4. For true unity, people must speak with one another, not just post in forums, but engage in meaningful, regular interaction. Online spaces alone are not enough to build a real sense of brotherhood. To achieve that, we need to talk with our neighbors to form strong local bonds to create nests within our own communities. This leads to a deeper question. What strategy would you propose to bring people together? How can we foster genuine communication without being co-opted, imitated, or infiltrated by external forces? What is your approach to unity? Should it grow beyond to the analyzed original nation? Is it for Europe, Africa, for ours, far beyond physical limits, such that we may benefit from focused power gathered from many rivers throughout the world, so that all battles may be won one at a time with overwhelming strength? Yours truly, FF.
I was hoping we'd have Moritz for this one, because he's interacting with people who are already doing this, like Eric Orwell.
Is that all you got, Mark? Is that it? I'm going to be
Got nothing.
I'm just going to be brief. Is that it's not what brings people together isn't talking. It's actually working toward a common objective and compromising. And so what you have to think about it is not as talking, but as negotiating. And so what brings people together is negotiating. It's not purposeless, it's purposeful. And so any strategy I'd propose would be one that brought people together for purposeful, right? Purposeful pursuit of a common interest. What we used to have before the government intervened was called the civil society, where people formed social organizations, usually started by both men and women, because men and women acknowledged that they lived different lives. And we would form male and female and some mixed organizations that people would learn to negotiate with one another. And this involves all sorts of signal stuff, which I'm going to avoid. Work with one another toward common goals. So the issue is, how do we maximize the number of conditions under which people pursue common goals and create cohesion through that pursuit of common goals? Well, the original purpose of course, survival in a village is that. The original purpose of our Christian communities, which is basically built around a church, was that. The original purpose, once we had enough free resources, we developed the civil society, which was where all these clubs come from and these organizations come from in our past. And what has happened is we have offloaded all of that to government, and I'm going to really horrify you, and instead exchanged that for television, which is really the answer.
The Jew in every living room, right?
Say again? Every Jew in every living room. Exactly, that's the problem. Or a Jew in every living room. And so what we should do, if you want to make it work, you're not going to make people pick a higher cost solution from a lower cost solution. Collaborating with people toward a common end is a higher cost solution. It also exposes your status, a status you may not be willing to confront. So television is a great way of believing you have a status that's illusory and not negotiating with people or learning from them or working toward a common goal. So, I mean, what would I do is I would say, if you want to truly fix it, you either create formal institutions that people have to participate in, or you remove the voluntary means by which they avoid participation in communities that need them. I mean, there's sort of, Martin and I have sort of interesting takes on this. I have a very Anglo one, and he has a very Czech one, maybe German one, which is that you need, I think more, Martin, you would think that we would need formalisms to do that, whereas in the Anglo world, we do it informally because of our history. But either way, if it's done formally or informally, the problem is we don't make collective decisions. We have given it to the government to make collective decisions. And this has mean we vote the least competent people with the least common interest into those positions where they do the least effort job to produce the least results. Because whenever you put a government in charge and they produce results that are advantageous in some way, they appear to be somebody perceives them as being non-helpful to their cause, or an expenditure that wasn't favored above their cause. And so what you get is what we call bureaucratic government, is they do as possible.
Yeah, we have this managed our democracy,
Yes.
which is basically the politicians do what lobbyists want and then claim that people themselves are responsible for voting for them.
Correct.
Even though they never voted for any of that.
Correct. So, so the question bothered me a little bit because of this. It's social rather than political, but it sees to political end. And so you cannot do that without some reason for people to work together. You can't have friends without some common interests. I mean, the big problem I have is feminism destroyed the family. Feminism and women in the voting has destroyed the family. And by destroying the family, they have basically destroyed the reason for men and women to compromise. All right. And so when you do that, now you have individuals voting instead of families voting, where families have a common interest and individuals don't, or have inactionable common interests.
I think to some extent those were symptoms of women in the workforce.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how you bring people together. You make babies. You know, that's the question that talks to this question. Why? Why do you want to win the battles? Why do you want unity? What does it do for you?
Not unless you have babies.
To your children. That's why you want to win the battles. That's why you want unity.
Yep.
Anyway, the guy is asking how to do this when we have no access to political power.
Well, you don't need political power to have babies. I describe, so there's a couple points in here, right? I describe community different than other people do. Nothing online is your community. Your community is the people that are willing to invest in you in some form of capital, some sort of shared capital that you have direct physical access to. That's the only community you're ever going to have. We use the label to describe a lot of other things, but that's what community is, right? If it's not physical access, it's not actually community. It's some other thing that we just call community for convenience. And your neighborhood is the distance away from your home your kids can go without you. That's your neighborhood. Most people don't have any neighborhood at all, right? So we're not doing the kid thing. And even people that are having kids, they abstract their investment in those kids by sending them off to school for most of the day. That means they're not exposing themselves to the pressure of having to invest in and raise those kids and be responsible for those kids. They're pushing, they're buying that pressure, that adaptation from somebody else, right? So I mean, we're escaping all this. The whole point, the thing that's going to produce the investment is having kids, or aiming yourself in that direction, right? I mean, that's why these battles are worth winning. You know, you have kids, you're bringing them to the park, so you're talking to your neighbors. You have kids, you're bringing them to the martial arts class, so you're talking to the people there, and you're building connections with them. You have kids, like me, we homeschool, right? So we belong to half a dozen different homeschool co-ops. Our kids are friends with all their kids. The parents are all friends with each other. We do things together as a community.
Yeah, but
right? We do that because we are investing in our children, in that in exposing them to those things, and through that we're building community. So
that's right. So what I'd like to insert there is that in order to do that, you have to forego quite a bit of ego, quite a bit of self-delusion, and open yourself to cooperation and compromise, right?
Right.
Right. So is that how much of that delusion is the problem?
Right. Well, but that's what, my soapbox here. That's why I assert that the fully developed human is not man and woman, it's father and mother, because they are still, they're able to do that part.
Right.
They've
Exactly.
gone through the process, exposing themselves to the developmental process of doing that part. In doing so, they've actually reached full development. They've actually reached full maturity.
It's actually true. This is particularly true in Italy, because it's more true in Latin culture, that you're not an adult until you're married and have children. You're a child, and it's
right.
Now, Martin, does that what is that? Does that qualify by you? No.
No.
Well, that's true. That's true in elephant tribes. That's true in meerkat tribes. It's true in lion tribes. We see that all over the place in complex mammals that are group oriented. We see that same dynamic. You're not acknowledged by the group as an adult until you've produced viable offspring, right? Successful offspring.
But the problem is that they desire they'll class that as a naturalistic fallacy when it's not. It's that
Right.
the problem is you don't have a common interest with the group
Right.
until
Right.
you have.
And it's also that
You don't,
added,
have,
that
wait,
added
wait, wait,
pressure is happening there too,
you don't have an intertemporal common interest
Right.
with them until then, and that's what makes us build polities is intertemporal common interests, right? Otherwise, it's just mere survival.
Right. Yeah.
Well, same people.
I love a hobby, but it's not making me invest in the future.
The same people that complain about naturalist fallacy will then point that the animals are sometimes gay, and so it's okay.
Yes.
Well, that they commit next-op policy all the time.
Yes.
Like every time they say that, I was like, okay, there's another Naxal. Like they just don't understand statistics. This amazing ability of enumeracy, not understanding statistics, and I'm losing my train of thought. There's one more. And the lack of internal consistency.
Yes.
Well,
But the left's internal consistency is want. It's not truth
Right.
or possibility. It's just
Right.
want.
So, when we talk about nature, it's not about something that exists, but what are the outcomes? And
Yeah.
even among animals, homosexuality leads to that of that lineage.
By the very definition, that's an evolutionary dead end. The good news is that the problem sorts itself out in like 100 years.
I mean, liberals are in reproductive. I mean, it's already in the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
like I
we
said,
have-
it sorts itself out in about 100 years,
yeah, it's amazing.
which is why they want to live
Yeah.
forever.
But I don't think everyone should be Amish.
Say that again.
I don't think everyone should be Amish.
Exactly.
Everyone wants what the Amish have, but nobody wants to live like the Amish live. So
It's if you could use power tools, I would go along with everything. But
Yeah, but without the Abrahamism, ideally.
I love them. I've run into them quite a time.
300 friends to move a barn over a tractor.
Yeah.
That means I have 300 friends I can draw on if I need something. So
It's like that family in Ukraine that they've produced between the great-grandparents, the grandparents, and the parents. They've produced 300 and something people. They basically have built a town out of a family. And so whenever you want anything, you just say, we need, to build a garage or something like that. And everybody's doing, it's not a problem because everybody's doing for everybody, right? And they manage it through pressure, right? It doesn't matter if you don't want to do it, you got to do it. So I think that's fascinating. I know that's Bryan's our staff member Bryan's fantasy. All right, do we have any time for any more? Or are we?
Well, so question 5 is the question itself is pretty long. It's really 4 questions and that's into one.
Yeah,
I don't know if we're going to be able to answer in 4 minutes.
I've got nothing for it. It's not the topic I've looked into properly.
Yeah,
I
there's something.
understand his problem. I don't want to go. I want to save this for later. But basically, he's doing what most a problem for men in particular is that they can latch onto one thing with explanatory power. They overextend it instead of saying what are the things that have explanatory power and what is their priority. In his argument here, he's putting a lot of it on food, which isn't. I mean, people do that, right? When you can say, okay, if you think that's important, look instead at what is the issue of immigration and introduction of women into the workforce and the voting pool. How much does food vary, or how much women take?
Let me stop you right here. I don't want to shortchange this person because we haven't even read his question yet. Let's save that until next time, since we only have 3 minutes to go.
Okay, I've read his question. I'm just saying that if we want to talk about it, that it's not. It looks complicated, but it's not.
Okay.
It's just a common male cognitive bias.
So do you want to talk about it? Like, how long do you think it'll take you to answer this question?
Well, I just did. I mean, that's all it is. It's that is the diet you're bringing up here as important as you think it is? And the answer is, for the problems we're facing, not at all.
Okay. Let me do this, because I don't want to shortchange this person. If you guys could stay for like 5 more minutes or something. So question 5. Oh, actually, before I do that. All right. Question 5 from Nash. Apologies if there's any ambiguity in my writing and for the length of the question. Territory theory, raw meat, and the civilization implication. There's a relatively new sprung idea on Twitter which suggests that raw food, especially meat, milk, and eggs, is vastly more bioavailable than the cooked alternatives. The underlying idea is that cooking denatures the key proteins and micronutrients, and that the bacteria, viruses, and parasites we get from food are actually beneficial stressors of the body in an accelerationist sense. The diet suggests that most illness is not pathogenic, but rather the body's attempt to detox and purge industrial toxins and metals. The theory, terrain theory, cites polio as an example, arguing that it wasn't the result of viral contagion, but rather the canned food that became common after World War II. The viruses that were noted in correlation with polio sickness were rather biological agents assisting in detoxification. One resolution for modern-day sickness, depression, and even decadence will lie in a return to raw ancestral nutrition. And this model, if taken seriously, would have major civilizational implications. Most mammals live 6 to 7 times longer than their developmental maturity period, which suggests that the actual natural lifespan for hominoids is greater than 150. The diet is framed as a form of soft eugenics. Apparently, maternal consumption of raw food during pregnancy results in highly elevated cognitive metrics in their children.
Nonsense.
Most of the troubles of modernity, and possibly the underclasses, could stem in large part from the chronic dietary and pharmaceutical burden placed on the body. This is all to ask several questions within one. Is it plausible mainstream science has been fundamentally wrong about something as basically as cooking? Would most underclass behavior be better understood as an endocrine and neural compensation for poor nutrition, like your strong stance on genetic causality? If so, could the production of a healthy, intelligent, neotenous population solve a vast portion of modern society's issues? And
but by genetic means.
Even if we exclude terrain theory, how important is the link between healthy eating and the general thriving of the population? I think if this were true, i.e., if the theory was true, i.e., consuming raw food will actually produce a healthier, intelligent, and neotenous population, then like, why aren't chimps ruling the planet?
Well, okay, this is really okay. Fine. First of all, there is no that's absolutely raw because these are my notes. Raw meats cooked and viruses are failed tests of operationality. In other words, there's no science to support it. It's true that minimizing ultra processing processed food would be useful. I know, because I've become allergic to fucking all of it. It's goddamn horrible. Nutrition is a force multiplier. It doesn't. It basically. It's. This is where we come up with the. What's the thing in IQ? The Flynn effect. Is that you can move the average by reducing the kids that are undersupplied nutritionally, but you can't move the average intelligence of people upward. You can't. You can't move the intelligence of people upward. You can only trim the failures.
We also get longer legs with proper nutrition.
Yes.
Which is weird.
Is that why I'm short, bro? Is that why I'm short? No, my ancestors are all short. If we want civilizational returns, we have to do do it where biology actually is plastic, and that's at prenatal to age 6, lead removal, school meals, and sleep rhythm. Those are the things that actually make a difference. I don't know where this diet thing is coming from. The argument against the massive increase in carbohydrates, the massive increase in sugars, which are basically what carbohydrates are, and the massive increase in chemicals, those are all true. But if you want to say there's stuff missing from diets, that's absolutely false. You have to work today to have a dietary. You have to do something stupid, like Steve Jobs, like eating fruit, right? For overeating fruit, you have to do something stupid in order to be deprived today. I mean, there are people who eat like potato chips and hamburgers all day long, but the fact is, if you just you have a hamburger and a glass of milk, you're better off than most people in history. So I don't really know where this is all coming from.
Well, I'm happy for people to research alternative paradigms, but preemptively I'm skeptical and think this would be at most a small factor among many.
Yeah, well, I mean, like if you like to run experiments on yourself, run it and get a sizable statistical base, and then maybe you discover something that the rest of the humanity throughout history have not.
Right. One of the things I see in this is that people use the word raw, but what if we look back, through history, we ate foods in various natural states. That doesn't mean raw. We ate foods that were smoked and dried and jerked and fermented and things like that. Those are all natural states for food as they interact with bacteria, as they interact with air, things like that. So it's not necessarily raw food, but it's food in natural states that we want to be focusing on, right? But that gets conflated as raw because we're missing that whole point of natural. The other side of it's back to some of our earlier points. Because we don't recognize the negative impact of our own separation from natural pressures, we don't recognize that a lot of our food sources are also dysfunctional because they're no longer under natural pressures, right? We've pushed nature's feedback away from.
I remember talking to a colleague who came from Mongolia, the actual country Mongolia, and we're talking about grass-fed beef.
Right.
He's like, well, if you talk to any Mongolian about grass-fed beef, they're gonna look at you like you're stupid.
Beef. Yeah. So you don't want to be eating raw, sick animals, right? So if you have a fantastic source to pull from, then yeah, experiment with this stuff. If you don't, cook it.
Yeah, the whole thing of why are we able to run? It's because of cooked food.
Right.
That's why we can
I haven't
run.
heard of that one.
Well, that's why we don't have stomachs the size of gorillas.
Oh, right, yeah, because you don't need all that stomach tract to digest raw food. And
yeah,
so
we don't have to multiply the amount of digestion that occurs, right?
Right. I mean,
we break down it by preparing it.
The thing is, our brains are fucking expensive. I mean, even yours, Luke. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's kind of big to start with.
I get a discount,
Brains are fucking expensive, but so's persistence running. And so the way we became us is to free up our hands, was to be able to eat cooked foods and develop persistence running. And so once we could do that, now we have tools, right? We can carry resources. We can do all sorts of stuff. But if you have to digest food, you can't be a persistence runner, right? So if you get down to the second thing is, the other half of it is, if we could digest food more quickly, we'd light on fire. I don't know if anybody thinks about that part, but there's a maximum rate of energy conversion that doesn't result in heat. Excess heat that's higher than the body can tolerate. So we have this optimum window between what we can do morphologically, right, and biologically within this window of what it costs to keep us alive with this expensive brain and this persistent running, while without lighting on fire or without getting a belly too big for digestion that we can't do persistence running, or right. So, and
Well, huskies also have some interesting adaptations. They can eat and basically immediately turn it into useful energy, and they're also persistent runners.
yes.
How come they don't light on fire?
Well, because there is a body size weight energy conversion that it doesn't cause them to light on fire, right? But I mean, if you were like the size of an elephant or a gorilla, and you couldn't have prepared food or meat, then you basically can't digest. If you try to digest other foods faster, you basically light on fire. I mean, it's just a natural problem of how do you convert energy from one state to another. Anyway, so what are we trying to answer right now? Oh,
I think we already answered this question about raw food.
We can develop more heat-resistant stomach, I suppose.
Well, I think if you're following that logic, like at some point,
you'd have to have flames coming out of your ass, Brad. The answer.
Well, if you eat really hot salsa, that's essentially what happens.
Yeah, so some people are already doing this.
But all joking aside, like if we take this logic to its conclusion, then the ultimate human beings should not even have a digestive system. Like we should just be able to create our own food and inject it directly into the circulatory system, and have a brain like the half size of the body or something, i.e. little gray men.
So let's give him some credit.
The bacteria in the gut though, so we don't want to lose that.
So let me give him some credit. It's true that the lower consumption of food you have, in other words, the digesting food causes cellular decay. In other words, it's not only cellular sustenance, but cellular decay. So that's why there's this value of a little intermittent fasting or regulating your dietary intake, because it's more work to produce fat and then expend it than it is to just eat what you need to maintain your energy level. Right. This usually works better for women who have small bodies and small frames, but doesn't work for us guys that need to have a certain amount of calories just to move our weight around. So I don't mean that like my girth that's increased during COVID because of COVID. I mean just the fact that we weigh 180 pounds instead of 100 pounds, right? So that tends to work more for them, and you do see that more commonly.
No, Curt, it's because you sit around for too long. You should stand at your desk more.
Somebody got me a standing desk. Did you know that, Francis? Some friend of mine got me a standing desk.
Yes, well, I haven't seen you using it.
I can press this button, and it goes up, right? And I can press.
He uses it to lift his coffee cup up.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, God damn it! This is what see you guys. This is what friends and the NLI are like. All right, love you guys. So have we? So he's right about that. He's right about that aspect of it. Whereas and there is some truth to it. Accumulates cellular exhaustion to do that. But most of us die for well-known reasons, which is cellular necessity. What is it called? Cells that die.
Not autophagy. I think it is autophagy, right?
Yeah, it's
the program cell death.
Yeah. It's how the body removes the death.
Yeah.
I was thinking senescence is what I was thinking of. All right. So what we have, I have moles, right? So if you have a mole, it means you have long telomeres. Long telomeres are what keep your cells able to reproduce without dying. And so you want to have long telomeres. You want to have no other serious natural defects, especially in your circulatory system. And, you can live for quite a long time. I believe within about 30 to 50 years, given the state of the current research, that we can prevent cellular, what we think of as persistent cell replication. In other words, errors in replication due to cell death, right? So we can maintain like lobsters, the capacity to produce healthy replication cells for indefinitely. If that's the case, we should live to 140, 150 years, but we can't do that. The impact we can have on the rest of our lives is basically fitness that largely supplies oxygenation. That's actually the issue. And yes, it will help if you eat paleo. I know because every time I've lost weight, that's what I've done. You eat paleo and you especially walking is fine. You don't need to run, and you lift a few weights. You will be fine, right? But the major factor on lifespan is actually genetics, and until we have a solution to the genetics problem, which will firstly be the ones I've mentioned, we are not going to get up there with any regularity, especially with just modifying our diets.
I'm not sure if it's something to be solved and if people living longer is necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say there are few things that can in my opinion, there are few things that can fundamentally change the human nature. Extended lifetime is one of those. If we live to 150, that means there's 2x the current seculum, i.e., the four generations. That that technology can fundamentally and will fundamentally change the way that humans operate. And like any introduction to new technology, let's not embrace the technology optimism and accelerate to think that any kind of progress is net positive. For all I know, it could be a double-edged sword.
The question isn't if you're better off when you're living longer, but if your group is better off when you're living longer.
I would say that most of the problems I see are from extended adolescence, and few of the problems I see are from extended maturity. So I would think we would discover more stable civilizations with extended maturity.
No, but think of it this way: what if the boomers that are alive now live to 150? We are already ruled by geriatrics. What effect will that do to the young when they know that the boomers are gonna live for another 70-something years?
It's funny because we've circled back around. Yeah, if we come to be dependent on this technology without introducing effective proxies for the impacts of the technology, it will produce dysfunctions.
Yeah, boomers are an argument for trimming lifespans, not lengthening them.
Yes. And one of the adaptive technologies could be, let's have a world war.
Anyway, we had another point there and I lost it. Well, have we burned through our time yet? I think we have.
Yeah, we're actually way over time for this bonus encore question.
Okay, so Martin, great job today. Luke, thank you for coming. I wish you would do this more often. It's valuable to us. Luke is a real philosopher in that sense, that he's an actual net contributor to ideas, and so it's and he has a very consistent. It's what I like. Why I like the Martin and May dichotomy is because we have the continental and Anglo viewpoints. In other words, I'm optimistic and Martin's pessimistic is probably the way to look at it. Adding Luke's position in here, which is tends to be more developmental, right? Is
naturalistic.
Naturalistic is
optimistic and naturalistic.
Yes. I can't. I'm going to leave that alone because I just want to go somebody. I want.
You don't know what I'm wearing right now.
I love teasing you, man, which you know. And so I'll behave. So, and Francis, you would do a great job of running this business, and I thank you for it. Thank you so much.
I love it. I mean, it was my idea in the first place, and frankly, I'm surprised that we went on for this long, and everybody is still having fun.
Well, we get good questions.
Yeah.
I mean, the people pose. I mean, we can tease Suki for throwing so many in here, but the truth is the questions are good.
Suki, you should pay us consulting fees.
No, pay him for his question. Anyway,
Just kidding.
So anyway, this is Francis, Martin, Luke, and Curt, the Natural Institute. Thank you for joining us. I hope you got something out of it. I certainly had a fun time with this set of questions. Well, Francis, what do you do to put this up on the? When does this go up live, etc.?
Oh, what do you mean?
This is live.
You're right. This is live and it goes immediately up there, right?
Yeah. So basically, after this meeting, YouTube will transcribe it, and it just automatically appears in the on the YouTube channel, and then it takes me maybe half a day to do some of the post processing, and then schedule the next session, which will be 2 weeks from now.
Great. All right. Thanks, guys.
Before you go, I also want to add, so for the rest of the staff member watching, you guys are all on the invite, all right? And any one of the staff members can drop in and grace us with their presence, not just the us three. And also, any of our paid Substack subscribers are also welcome to join. And if you want to join one of these sessions, just email the NLI staff at, actually, I think it's staff at NLI, one of the NLI aliases.
All right. Love you guys. Thanks a lot. This was a great time.
Okay, Curt,